I fully recognize it's been a minute. However, I promise I have videos filmed now and I'm going to be posting them on a regular basis. Hello, I go by Maisie and I talk about the arts and crafts and mental health and life and fun things in general. So if you'd like to, you can subscribe. Leave me a comment telling me one thing that you really like about yourself. Before I begin, I want to establish two things. Number one, I'm going to be knitting during this video. Take it or leave it, it's just what I do. Number two, it's incredibly hot in here and I have the ring light on and it's killing me. And I take a medication that makes me sweat a lot. So I'm going to be drenched and I apologize in advance, but that's just what it is. Also, I knit this and it's made of wool, so it's toasty in here. We could just say, what highlight is she wearing instead? So today I'm gonna be talking about electroconvulsive therapy. So the backstory behind this video is that I am losing my life as I live it. And because of that, I have started vlogging and I want to be able to post the vlogs. But before I post the vlogs, I want to explain why I am recording these memories in the first place. So today I'm going to be talking about my experience with electroconvulsive therapy, which is wild that I have the guts to do this compared to how scared I used to be to even acknowledge it when I first started getting it done. And now here I am making a whole YouTube video about my experience with it. Before I started ECT, I researched that shit. And all I could find were people with awful experiences on Reddit or like medical journalism. I couldn't really find people just kind of like openly talking about their experience that didn't have like an extremely bad experience or wasn't like a medical professional advocating for ECT. So here I am. I just want to talk about my experience. And I should have timestamps in the description about sections of this video. So a little bit of a backstory on me. I don't want to get too personal here, but it's kind of hard not to when you're talking about something like electroconvulsive therapy. So I'm just going to give you like a general backstory. There's a lot more to it, but I'm going to leave out the gory details. I've been struggling with my mental health for over a decade, since I was in early adolescence. I was 23 when I got my index of ECT done. And by that point, I had been on over 30 medications, just different psych meds to try. I had done 3 different like complete rounds of TMS. I have a video on my experience with TMS. It's probably old and embarrassing. But TMS really helped me. The first 2 rounds, complete 180. However, my third time doing TMS, it didn't make that much of a difference. However, there was a global pandemic happening, so that definitely could have contributed to it. And my insurance stopped covering it. So I was completely at a loss at this point. And at that point, even I had had an extensive history of hospitalizations over the past decade and residential treatment and a million medications, as I had said. I wanted to try therapeutic ketamine, but my insurance doesn't cover it and I can't afford it. So in May of 2021, I was admitted to the hospital yet again. I had been quite a few times during that short period of probably like September to May. I had been in the hospital and in residential treatment quite a few times, and I just was not getting better. And I was sort of at my wit's end. Something had to give. At that point, I was 23. I was unenrolling from grad school. I was so depressed. I couldn't get out of bed. The typical depressed. I was at one of my lowest lows. Now for ECT, there are different phases of ECT. There is your index, which is the initial set of treatments in a short period of time. So you do multiple treatments a week for X amount of weeks. And then you have a taper. So you kind of you slowly taper it off. And then you have a maintenance period that you can choose to do, but you don't have to. I chose to do the maintenance. But I did my initial index in the hospital. This is optional, at least where I go for ECT. You don't have to be inpatient to do it, but I was at a point where I couldn't take care of myself, so I had to be inpatient. There are a lot of different laws in different states and different countries surrounding ECT, so the laws that I'm talking about are relevant to the Los Angeles, California laws. It took a minute for my treatment team and I to decide to go through with ECT. I was warned that it was kind of a last resort treatment, and I completely agree with its use as a last resort treatment due to the side effects, which I'll talk about later. They did a lot of different tests on me to confirm my diagnosis before I went into ECT. I do have a diagnosis of bipolar 1. However, a lot of psych professionals, when they see me, I'm a young female and I struggle with self-harm, and I have an extensive, complex history of psychiatric treatment. And so they see that and they instantly go to borderline personality disorder. I instantly get labeled as a borderline patient when I don't fit the diagnostic criteria. So I had to do quite a few different assessments to kind of confirm that I had an actual bipolar diagnosis and that it wasn't actually a borderline misdiagnosis. Because from what I understand, there isn't a lot of literature to support ECT's use to treat borderline. I could be wrong, but that's just what I was told. DBT is kind of like the gold standard. So after a lot of neuropsych testing, I was confirmed to have a bipolar 1 diagnosis, and we decided to move forward with the ECT. I initially met with one of the ECT psychiatrists, and he looked at my history. He looked at the meds I had been on. I don't know if every hospital or center gives people a percentage chance that it will work, but the ECT doctor that I met with gave me a 50% chance of it working. When I heard 50%, I decided to go through with it. Even though that's not necessarily a super high percentage, I was desperate, so I decided to go through with it. Where I got ECT done, there was a lot of different legal red tape to go through. For example, I have to be assessed by 2 different psychiatrists monthly to make sure that I am able to consent to ECT. So my own psychiatrist and the hospital psychiatrist both do my capacity to make sure that I'm able to consent to ECT. There was kind of a lot of red tape, at least where I was, in terms of getting ECT. I had to get a bunch of different neuropsych tests done. I had to get a physical done, an EKG, but eventually we got the okay, and I started tapering off of my medication. Now, especially with bipolar medications, there's a lot of mood stabilizers that prevent seizures. And ECT is essentially a shock that induces a seizure. So because these medications prevent seizures, you have to go off of the medications. I don't know if this is the case for everyone, but I went off of all of my meds pre-ECT, and I have to say it was a really good thing I was in the hospital. I was one of those people where I was mega depressed and I thought my meds did absolutely nothing. I was taking all these medications and I still couldn't get out of bed. I thought they did nothing. That was not true, because when I eventually stopped my medication, I was pretty much catatonic. I was in a state where I wasn't really answering people. I couldn't really emote. I couldn't really talk. I couldn't really move. I couldn't really do much because I was so sad. That is the absolute worst I have ever felt, was when I went off of all my medication in the hospital. While I was in the hospital receiving ECT, I had the little IV tube in, and they just kept it on me on the unit. They would just flush it twice a day. In addition, for ECT, you have to be NPO, meaning you don't eat or drink anything for 8 hours beforehand. For me, this was difficult because I was always the last one getting ECT in the hospital. The way my hospital's ECT works is they get all the outpatient people done first, and then they move to the inpatient people. And of the inpatient people, I would always be last because I could tolerate hunger. I always called myself a healthy young man on the Titanic. Basically, I wasn't allowed to eat or drink all day. The not drinking was the worst because I really wanted water. I'd get really thirsty. But my treatments would be at 4 p.m. and that really sucked. But again, I think that is something that's more specific to my situation. Eventually, one of the nurses' assistants would come and get me from the unit, and they'd bring a wheelchair and they would wheel me to the ECT suite. So the way the suite looks is, at least where I go, there's a little nurse's station, and then there's 2 beds where people come in and get their IV fluids started, and then there's a little separate room where they actually do the procedure, and then there are 2 other beds for recovery, and obviously all these beds are separated by curtains. So basically, I would get on the suite, I would change into a gown, they would hook up my little IV thing to some fluids, and I would just vibe for a little bit. The anesthesiologists will check in with you before ECT. Then they bring you into the little room where the procedure is done. The ECT psychiatrist is also there. We would chat about how the treatment was going, how I was tolerating it, if I was having any side effects. And while I was talking to the psychiatrist, something that might be unique to me, but I know other people get it as well, they would give me a certain medication beforehand because I am prone to post-anesthesia agitation. Essentially, I wake up and I just start screaming in absolute terror, and it's really scary. So they give me a medication beforehand so I don't do that. They also give me an anti-nausea medication because general anesthesia makes me very nauseous, as I learned after my first time going under. Something that I really want to note here is that in my experience with ECT, the doctors and the nurses assistants and the anesthesiologists have all been nothing but absolute angels to me. I can only speak to where I get it done, but everyone there is so incredibly kind and helpful. While the medication is going and I'm talking to the ECT psychiatrist, at the same time, the nurses in the room with you will be wiping down my forehead and behind my ears. And they start placing like little stickers on my forehead and on my chest. And they'll put a regular oxygen mask on me. And they do timeout, which I think is something that is done before like every medical procedure, where they essentially just pause and say who they're treating and what they're doing. Usually they switch the regular oxygen mask to kind of like a bigger, like scarier looking one. It kind of smells like a beach ball. But then they'll put in a bunch of medications and they'll put in the induction meds. And I kind of just drift off to sleep. And I have to say, being put under general anesthesia is like really relaxing to me. I don't know if it's just because I've had it done so many times or what, but I really enjoy it. It's like a very deep, relaxing nap. So after you wake up from the procedure, I can barely remember any of these times, but the nurse's assistants helped me get dressed and then they would wheel me back to the unit. I started noticing a big change in my mood about 3 weeks in. Initially, they had planned to do 18 index sessions, but I ended up only doing 15 because I had such a good response to the ECT. And I was able to leave the hospital after being there for 6 weeks, which was really nice. I did ECT once a week for 4 weeks, and then I moved into my maintenance phase, which I am still in. In terms of side effects, I would say the majority of them are just from the day of. I do usually feel a little bit sore the day of, but that's not from flopping around during the procedure. That's from muscle relaxants they give you. In fact, you don't flop around during the procedure at all, only your foot kind of taps a little bit because they have a blood pressure cuff around your foot. Sometimes afterwards I have a bit of a headache and I usually have a sore jaw. The absolute hardest side effect by far is memory loss. After my index, I realized I lost pretty much all of 2019 and 2020. I've lost the vast majority of those 2 years. And over time, I have lost more. I've lost some of 2018 and 2017. I've also had a lot of difficulty forming new memories since getting ECT and being in my maintenance phase. I do feel like I'm losing my life as I live it. However, something that was advertised to me quite a bit when I was getting ECT was that sometimes memories come back. That was something I'd hear constantly, is that memories will come back after a little bit. And this is true for me, at least. I know everyone's experience is different, but I would get these like weird like flashbacks to like certain situations, and I'd be like, is that like a fever dream or did I watch The Vampire Diaries? I really wish I could control what I remember and what I don't remember. So that's pretty much the main reason why I advocate for ECT as a last resort treatment. It's invasive and it does cause memory loss. I will say I was absolutely warned, and it is as advertised, and it is what it is. The way I look at my memory loss is I think I'm losing my life as I live it, but at least I have a life to live. Overall, I do think ECT saved my life. I'm very confident about that. I think about how low and unstable I was the year prior to ECT, and then I think about the 2 years it's been after ECT and how much better I have gotten, and it's a world of difference. I'm not 100% better, and I've had to be hospitalized since. I continue to have depressive episodes here and there. However, overall, I am significantly more stable. In addition, a lot of the medication that didn't really work for me before ECT now actually works for me significantly better than it did after ECT. And that's something that's pretty common from what I understand. A lot of people will try a medication and it won't work for them at all. And then they'll have ECT done and then they'll try the same medication afterwards and it will have a significantly better effect on them. Like I said, everyone's experience is different, but that's been my experience. So even though my memory is terrible, at least I'm stable. In my maintenance phase, the longest I've gone between sessions is 8 weeks. The sweet spot for me is like 2-3 weeks, which is pretty frequent. But it's kind of what I need. So that's something else to keep in mind about my memory loss, is that I get it pretty frequently for a maintenance. I'm going to take this time to answer a few common questions that I get asked. And if you have any more questions, please leave them in the comments, because I'm thinking about doing a Q&A video if I get enough of them. If I don't get enough of them, I'll just answer in the comments. The number one question that I get asked is, does it hurt? The answer is no, it does not hurt. It is not like the old lady from Requiem for a Dream. Because ECT is done under general anesthesia, it's painless. The worst is just slight discomfort when you wake up from the muscle relaxant or jaw soreness. That's it. But you don't feel a shock, and that's that. Something else that I get asked pretty frequently was, did I feel pressured into it? A lot of people seem to be under the impression that doctors kind of push ECT. For me, I had the opposite experience. I had a lot of doctors and a lot of psychiatrists in the hospital kind of cautioning me around ECT because of the memory loss. And at least in California, there's a lot of red tape to jump through. Like I said, I need capacity once a month, and the capacity has to be done by 2 different psychiatrists. So it's my outside psychiatrist with no affiliation to the center that does ECT, and then one of their psychiatrists. They both have to tell me the side effects and make sure I understand why I'm getting it, what the side effects are, and determine that I'm able to consent to get ECT, and then I have to consent to it. No, I was not pressured into it. If anything, I was discouraged, and I completely understand due to the memory loss. I honestly would discourage anyone who hasn't tried literally everything else, especially TMS, to not do ECT. Something else I get asked is it worth the memory loss? And in my opinion, for me personally, I know other people have different opinions, but given that it worked really well for me, it's been 100% worth the memory loss. I do get really sad about it sometimes, especially like looking at old pictures and videos. If it wasn't for ECT, I don't think I would have a life to live. So it's worth the memory loss if I get to at least exist in the moment. The last thing I get asked a lot is, would I recommend it? I've had quite a few people ask me if I recommend ECT for them. A lot of peers, a lot of friends, and I've really only recommended it to one person. I really only recommend it to people who have already tried TMS, people who have tried multiple kinds of different talk therapy and residential treatment, and also for people who have been on like double digits of medications. However, with that being said, I do not have a medical degree. I'm not a licensed psychiatrist. Definitely listen to a medical professional over some girl on the internet. So there's that. I think that's gonna be it. So again, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I would be happy to answer them in a future Q&A video. And if you have an experience with ECT, feel free to share. If you disagree with something I said, feel free to let me know. Especially if you're a doctor, please let me know. Again, disclaimer, I have no medical license or professional knowledge. This is just my experience as a patient. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Bye.